Crack. Then silence. Crack. Then silence. A mirror shatters, upstairs. 30 seconds later, a gunshot. The neighbors freeze. Footsteps in the hallway. A door slams. Constable Webb enters first. He sees the body, male, early 40s. Single bullet wound to the chest, gun on the floor. Right hand close to the grip. No movement. He notes the open window. Trellis, outside. Glass dust on the carpet. Webb calls Inspector Morrison. Morrison scans the room. Suicide, he says. Mrs. Sanderson, the neighbor, shakes her head. That's not what I heard. Morrison ignores her. Orders Webb, seal the room. Downstairs. Evelyn Ashcombe sits straight. Face pale, eyes red, voice steady. It was murder, she says. Morrison writes nothing. Hastings stands near the door. He looks at Poirot. Poirot watches Evelyn. You are certain? He asks. Yes. What makes you certain? He booked our tickets this morning. We were leaving tomorrow. Poirot nods. Hastings starts to speak. Poirot raises a hand. Quiet. He walks to the stairs. Counts steps. 1, 2, 3. They enter the bedroom. Poirot examines the broken mirror. The break is clean. Shards scattered toward the room. Strike came from outside. He kneels at the window, measures sill to floor, 38 inches, leans out, sees the trellis down to the garden. Roses grow close, thorns sharp. He touches the sill. Gray dust on his fingertips. Cement, he says. Hastings checks the gun. Loaded, except for one shot. Poirot uses a handkerchief, lifts it, checks the barrel. Cool metal, no powder burns on the jacket cuff. He tilts his head. Odd, he says. Mrs. Sanderson speaks again. Glass first, then the gunshot. A gap. How long? Poirot asks. Half a minute, maybe more. Poirot repeats it. Half a minute. He steps around the room. Shoes crunch on glass. He stops at the desk. A train ticket lies open. Tomorrow's date. Destination underlined. He turns to Evelyn. Who knew of your plans? Only close friends, Hastings writes in his notebook. Poirot looks at the mirror, the open window, the trellis. He checks his watch, snaps it shut. Poirot says softly, Suicide? Nah, not yet. Ink can ruin a life. Charles Lorton sits across from Evelyn. He opens a folder, pulls out the insurance policy, paper slides, across the desk. Evelyn reads the top line. Her hand stays still. Lorton taps a clause with his pen. This is the problem. Poirot leans forward. Explain. It pays only if death is not suicide. Poirot nods, slowly. Hastings writes it down. How much is at stake? He asks. 20,000 pounds, Lorton says. Evelyn's eyes move to the paper. Her lips press together. That's the mortgage, she says. And the house? Hastings asks. At risk, Lorton answers. Poirot studies her face. You believe it was murder? Yes. Then we must prove it. Lorton clears his throat. The company will not wait forever. How long? Poirot asks. The inquest closes in 2 days. Hastings checks his notes. That's 48 hours. Lorton nods. The coroner will finalize the report by then. Poirot folds his arms. Inspector Morrison believes it is suicide. Yes, Lorton says. Evelyn's gaze hardens. He is wrong. Poirot glances at Hastings. Hastings keeps writing. What happens if the verdict stands? Poirot asks. They deny payment, Lorton replies. And the house? They will repossess. Evelyn's jaw tightens. I will not lose this house over a lie. Poirot looks at the paper again. He reads the clause, silently. No payment if death is self-inflicted. His finger rests on the line. Who else knows of this policy? Lorton shrugs. Perhaps a few friends, possibly the staff. Poirot tilts his head. Staff? Gardener? Housekeeper, driver. Hastings notes the names. Poirot's eyes narrow. Did your husband ever speak of enemies? Yes, Evelyn says, but not to me. Then to whom? I don't know. Poirot pushes the paper back. This clause is our enemy, not the company. The clause, Evelyn leans forward. Can you prove it? Poirot's voice is calm. If he was murdered, yes. Lorton shifts in his seat. You have little time. Poirot glances at Hastings again. Hastings nods. I will need the timetable, Poirot says. Lorton hands him a page. Poirot scans it. 2 days, no extensions. He stands. Hastings closes his notebook. Evelyn watches both men. You believe me? Yes, Poirot says. Then find the proof, she says. Poirot puts the paper into his pocket. He looks at Hastings. His eyes are steady. We have 48 hours, he says. Rooms keep smells. Poirot steps into the bedroom. Hastings follows. The door shuts. Poirot stops in the middle of the room. Gun oil, he says. Hastings sniffs. Yes, strong. Poirot moves to the wall. He touches the plaster. Wet, he says. Repairs? Hastings asks. Recently, Poirot answers. He turns toward the desk. Smoke, he says. Hastings looks at the carpet. Not from the gun? Poirot shakes his head. Old. He kneels, picks up a shard of glass. Edges, sharp. Holds it toward the light. It is from the mirror, he says. Glass dust covers part of the carpet. Poirot points to the window. It came from that direction. Hastings steps over the shards. He leans out. Trellis, in clear view. Poirot follows. He checks the latch. Loose. The window opens easily. Hastings looks down. Easy climb, he says. Poirot nods. He turns back to the room. He walks to the bed. Checks the victim's jacket. Pulls back the sleeve. No powder burns, he says. Hastings writes it down. Poirot checks the other sleeve. Clean. He sets the jacket down, moves to the floor, near the sill. Stops, points. A footprint, half of it. Whoever it was, they stepped here, Poirot says. The print is faint. Heel clear. Front missing. Hastings kneels. Could be from someone climbing out, he says. Or in, Poirot replies. Poirot measures the distance, sill to print. Just under 2 feet. He examines the direction of the heel. Facing outwards, he says. Hastings writes it down. Poirot stands. He walks to the dresser, opens the top drawer, looks inside. Nothing disturbed. Opens the second. Same. He closes both. Moves back to the window. Checks the sill again. Runs a finger along the edge. Stops, halfway, something on the tip. He rubs it between finger and thumb. Texture, rough. Color, faint gray. Hastings watches. What is it? Poirot doesn't answer immediately. He holds it up for a closer look. Gray powder. Not from the paint. Not from the wood. He glances toward the trellis, then back at the smear. Hastings waits for him to speak. Poirot puts the gray dust onto a sheet of paper, folds it carefully, slips it into his pocket. A faint smear of gray on the frame. Sound remembers. Mrs. Sanderson sits at her kitchen table. Poirot sits opposite. Hastings stands by the door. You heard something unusual? Poirot asks. Yes, she says. Tell me exactly. First, the glass. Then, the gun. How much time between? She hesitates. Half a minute, maybe more. Poirot takes out his watch. We will test it, he says. He sets the watch on the table. Imagine the moment again, he says. She nods. He points to Hastings. Break the glass. Hastings taps a teacup with a spoon. The sound, sharp. Poirot starts the watch. He raises his hand after 30 seconds. Was this the gap? Yes, she says. Poirot notes the time. The gap is real, he says to Hastings. Hastings writes it down. Poirot looks at Mrs. Sanderson again. Did you hear footsteps? No, she says. Any voices? No. What did you see? She looks toward the window. A shadow. Describe it. Tall. Lean. Anything else? She pauses. Yes, it moved strangely. How? Poirot asks. It was limping. Poirot leans forward. Which leg? She closes her eyes. Left, she says. You are sure? Yes. The left leg, dragged. Hastings writes. Poirot asks, Where did you see this shadow? Near the garden trellis, she says. Poirot nods once. Before or after the gunshot? Before, she says. How long before? A few seconds. Could you see the face? Number just the outline. Poirot glances at Hastings. Note, shadow seen before shot, left leg limp. Hastings writes it down. Did you hear any other noises? Small thud, she says. When? After the glass broke. Before the gun. Poirot considers. Direction? From the garden. He stands. Hastings follows. They walk to the garden side of the house. Poirot points to the trellis. Where exactly? Mrs. Sanderson steps forward. Here, she says, pointing to the ground. Poirot examines the soil. Marks, faint but visible. A partial footprint. He measures it quickly, notes the angle. He straightens, looks at Mrs. Sanderson again. You are certain about the limp? Yes, she says. Left leg? Yes. Left leg. Dragged a little, she whispers. Grief blurs truth. Evelyn Ashcombe sits at the table. Poirot sits across from her. Hastings stands to the side. Inspector Morrison leans on the wall. Poirot starts. Madame, I must ask you questions. Evelyn nods. Your answers must be exact. They will be, she says. What was your husband's mood yesterday? Calm? Busy? Any sign of despair? No. Any arguments between you? No. Poirot leans forward. What did you speak about last? Our trip, she says. What trip? We were leaving for Bath. He booked the tickets in the morning. Hastings writes. Poirot says, Show me proof. Evelyn stands. She walks to the sideboard, opens a drawer, takes out an envelope, hands it to Poirot. He opens it. 2 train tickets, tomorrow's date. Hastings notes the details. Poirot asks, Anyone else know? A few friends. No staff? Perhaps the driver. I told him to be ready. Poirot nods. He studies her face. You are certain your husband would not take his own life? I am certain. Why? He had plans. He hated the idea of suicide. He once called it selfish. Poirot turns to Hastings. Note that. Hastings writes. Poirot asks, Did he leave any message? No. Any unusual calls? None I know of. Poirot places the tickets back in the envelope, sets it on the table. He glances at Inspector Morrison. Morrison remains silent. Poirot continues. Madame, did your husband have enemies? Yes. Names. Reginald Thorpe, Victor Sloane, others, but those 2 stand out. Why? Thorpe over a debt. Sloane over business. Poirot tilts his head. What business? Investment scheme. My husband refused him. Hastings writes. Poirot says, Did Sloane ever visit? Yes, once, 6 months ago. How did it end? They argued. Sloane left angry. Poirot leans back. He looks at Morrison. Morrison shifts his stance. Poirot says to Evelyn, I believe you. Her eyes soften. But belief is not proof, Poirot adds. I understand, she says. Poirot stands. Hastings closes his notebook. Evelyn stays seated. Morrison steps forward. He picks up the envelope with the tickets. He sets it back down. Then he takes out the insurance policy from his coat. He flips to the suicide clause. His eyes stay on the page. He says nothing. Poirot watches him. Hastings notices the inspector's focus. Evelyn folds her hands in her lap. No one speaks. Inspector, Eyes the policy anyway. Reflections lure. Poirot stands in the bedroom. Hastings waits by the window. Inspector Morrison watches from the corner. The mirror is set back in its frame. Poirot checks the angle. He steps to the side. "Do not move," he tells Hastings. Poirot looks into the mirror. Hastings is in view. Behind him, part of the garden is reflected. Poirot adjusts the mirror slightly. The garden area grows larger in the reflection. "Now," Poirot says. He waves to Morrison. "Stand outside, by the trellis." Morrison leaves. Footsteps fade on the stairs. Poirot tells Hastings, "Face the window." Hastings turns. From the mirror's position, Morrison's head and shoulders appear in the reflection. Morrison calls from outside. "Can you see me?" "Yes," Poirot answers. "Inside?" Morrison asks. "Yes." "In the mirror?" Poirot replies. Poirot steps closer to the window. He checks the alignment again. "If a man stood on the trellis," Poirot says, "the victim would see him in the mirror, as if he was in the room." Hastings nods. "And if the man raised a weapon?" "The victim would face the mirror and be facing the gun," Poirot finishes. He moves back to the desk, measures distance from the chair to the mirror, then from the mirror to the window, writes the figures on a small pad. Hastings looks out the window. "Trellis is close enough," he says. Poirot replies, "Yes, close enough for aim." He checks the carpet under the window. Glass dust, still there. He looks at the sill. The faint gray smear remains. Poirot picks up a piece of chalk from his pocket. He walks to the window, calls to Morrison, "Step down to the second rung." Morrison moves. His position changes in the mirror. Poirot notes the shift. "Good. Now, the first rung." Morrison moves again. His shoulders fill more of the reflection. Hastings says, "Perfect view from here." Poirot agrees. He steps outside, onto the garden path, looks up at the trellis, marks the spot Morrison stood with chalk, then marks the lower rung, 2 clear points. He steps back inside, checks the reflection again. Both chalk marks are visible in the mirror from the desk position. Poirot puts the chalk away. He faces Hastings. "This is where the killer stood," he says. Hastings writes it down. Poirot adds, "The mirror was bait." The killer wanted the victim to turn. Morrison climbs down. Poirot remains at the sill. His eyes stay on the chalk marks. Poirot marks the trellis with chalk. Touch tells the truth. Poirot stands by the trellis. Hastings beside him. Inspector Morrison waits on the path. Poirot touches the wood. "Rough," he says. Hastings runs his hand over it. "Splinters," he agrees. Poirot examines the side near the roses. Thorns reach into the climbing path. "Sharp," Poirot says. He leans closer. A small snag on one thorn. He pulls it free. A short thread, light gray. "Clothing fiber," Poirot says. Hastings takes it, rubs it between finger and thumb. "Wool," he says. Poirot nods. "From a sleeve." Or trouser, he adds. He slips the thread into a paper fold, pockets it. He grips the trellis again. Fingertips pick up a faint residue. He rubs them. A smell rises. "Rust," Poirot says. Hastings leans in. "Yes, like old nails." Poirot points to the nails in the frame. "Not new. They transfer to skin easily." Morrison looks at the base. "Marks in the soil," he says. Poirot steps down, crouches at the bottom. Shoes sink into damp earth. Mud clings to the rails. "Mud from last night?" Hastings asks. "Likely," Poirot replies. Poirot studies the ground. 2 impressions. A foot pressed here, angle faces outward. "He pushed off here to jump down," Poirot says. He moves a rose branch. A deeper mark beneath. "Landed hard," Hastings says. "Yes," Poirot replies. Poirot takes a small folding magnifier, studies the soil. Fine grit mixed with loam. He leans into the flower bed. His hand brushes something solid. He moves the earth aside. Metallic scrape. He grips the object, pulls it halfway free. Weight uneven, surface rough, shape irregular, color muted under dirt. Hastings steps closer. What is it? Poirot doesn't answer, shifts more soil away. Outline appears. A lump, flat on one side, edges chipped, not fully exposed. Poirot glances at Hastings, then at Morrison. Says nothing. He digs carefully with both hands. Object loosens. Half visible now. Stone. Half hidden in the flower bed. Even rocks bleed. Poirot loosens the stone from the soil. It comes free with a pull. He turns it in his hands. One side flat, the other chipped. Hastings bends closer. Blood? He asks. Poirot studies the surface. Rust-brown flecks cling to the edge. Dried, Poirot says. He scrapes a bit with his fingernail. The color stays. He rubs it between finger and thumb. Not rust, old blood, Poirot says. Morrison crosses his arms. From the victim? He asks. Perhaps, Poirot replies. He weighs the stone in his palm. Just right to throw, he says. He makes a light swing. Arc ends at window height. The weight fits, Poirot adds. Hastings points at one face. Tiny specks glint. Poirot brushes them with his thumb. Fine particles scatter. Glass dust, Poirot says. Same as the carpet upstairs, Hastings replies. Poirot nods. It struck the mirror before the shot, he says. Morrison frowns. Why break the mirror first? To turn the victim toward the window, Poirot answers. Poirot kneels again, checks the ground where the stone was. Lodged. No other debris nearby. He stands, takes a paper evidence bag, opens it, slides the stone inside, seals the top. Hastings asks, so the killer threw this, then fired? Yes, Poirot says. The broken glass distracted. The bullet followed. He taps the bag gently. This may hold skin or blood traces. Morrison says, lab will confirm. Poirot agrees. But even without the lab, we have enough for deduction. He tucks the bag into his coat pocket. Hastings looks at the trellis. Could he throw from there? Easily, Poirot says. He glances at the chalk marks. They are in range. Poirot wipes his hands on a cloth, examines his fingertips. A faint red smear remains. Still wet? Hastings asks. Number stained into the surface. Poirot answers. Poirot steps back toward the house, looks at the open window above, then the trellis, then the garden path. Morrison says, we have a method now. Yes, Poirot replies. Next, we need the man who fits it. Poirot looks at Hastings. Note, stone with blood, glass dust, weight fits throw to window height. Hastings writes fast. Poirot pats the pocket with the evidence bag. Now, we find the thrower. Find me a man with a scratch. Anger is loud. The door swings open, hard. Reginald Thorpe steps in, voice already raised. Where is he? Poirot looks up from the table. Sit, Monsieur Thorpe. I will not sit, Thorpe snaps. You are upset, Poirot says. I am furious, Thorpe replies. Hastings moves between them. State your business, he says. Gerald Ashcombe owed me money, Thorpe says. How much? Poirot asks. £500. When was it due? Last week. And you threatened him? Yes. I said I'd make him pay. Poirot tilts his head. When did you last see him? 2 nights ago, Thorpe says. Where? Outside the club. At what time? 10:30. Poirot writes the time. What happened? He laughed at me, said I'd never see a penny. And you responded, I told him he'd regret it. Morrison leans forward. Do you own a gun? No, Thorpe says. Ever fired one? Yes, at the range. Years ago. Poirot asks, where were you last night? playing cards at Wilton's. What time did you arrive? 8 o'clock. Leave? Past midnight. Poirot glances at Hastings. Hastings notes the times. Who saw you? Poirot asks. 6 other players. The dealer. Anyone step outside? Yes, I did. Once. What time? 11:15. Poirot checks his watch. The shot was fired at 11:16, he says. Thorpe's eyes narrow. I wasn't here. Where were you? Poirot presses. Out front, smoking. How long? 5 minutes. Anyone see you? Yes, the doorman. Poirot turns to Morrison. Confirm it, he says. Morrison leaves. Poirot studies Thorpe. You are angry enough to kill. But I didn't, Thorpe says. Your motive is strong, Poirot says. My method is winning at cards, not shooting men, Thorpe replies. Hastings says, you had the opportunity. But no reason to throw stones, Thorpe says. Poirot watches him closely. You know about the stone? I heard the gossip, Thorpe says. Morrison returns. Doorman confirms, he says. Poirot closes his notebook. Your alibi holds by 1 minute, he says. That's all I need, Thorpe replies. Poirot stands. Do not leave town, he says. I won't, Thorpe answers. Thorpe walks out. Hastings leans toward Poirot. Do you believe him? Poirot looks at his notes. He is not the man who climbed the trellis, Poirot says. Then why keep him on the list? Hastings asks. Poirot draws a line through half of Thorpe's name. Poirot crosses his name, halfway. Dust marks men. Poirot and Hastings step onto the worksite. Russell Square. Noise of tools. Men in overalls move between stacks of timber. Cement dust hangs in the air. Poirot approaches the foreman. I seek a man, Poirot says. Foreman wipes his hands. Name? Victor Slade, Poirot replies. Foreman frowns. Not sure. Describe him. Tall, lean, left leg limp, Poirot says. Foreman nods slowly. Yes, he was here last week. Doing what? Carrying bricks, badly. Why badly? Soft hands, not a mason's hands. Poirot asks, how long did he work? 2 days. Then he vanished, the foreman says. Did he give an address? Yes. Dorset Street boarding house. Poirot takes out a small notebook, writes the address. Anything else? He asks. He favored his left leg, like it hurt, the foreman says. Did he mention other work? Number kept to himself. Poirot shows him the gray thread in a folded paper. Recognize this fabric? Looks like the jacket he wore, the foreman says. Poirot puts the paper away. Hastings says, could he throw a stone that size? Yes, the foreman answers. He's wiry, but strong enough. Poirot nods. Merci, he says. They leave the site. On the way, Hastings asks, think he's our man? He is in the right place. He has the limp, he has the jacket, and he left without reason, Poirot says. They reach Dorset Street. Boarding house is narrow. Poirot knocks. Mrs. Hartwell opens the door. Yes? Poirot introduces himself. I seek Victor Slade. She frowns. No one here by that name. He may use another, Poirot says. Tall, limpio, gray jacket. Mrs. Hartwell hesitates. That would be Mr. Sloane, she says. Poirot glances at Hastings. May we see his room? He's out, she says. Poirot smiles faintly. All the better. She leads them upstairs. 2nd floor. Hallway narrow. She stops at the end. Here, she says. A number on the door. Poirot tries the handle. It does not turn. Locked, he says. Do you have a key? Mrs. Hartwell shakes her head. He keeps it with him. Hastings leans close to Poirot. What now? Poirot studies the lock. Now, we wait, he says. He steps back from the door. Looks at Mrs. Hartwell. When will he return? Tonight, around 8, she says. Poirot nods once. He checks his watch. Still hours to go. Room 7. Door locked. Cloth remembers pain. Poirot waits in the hallway. Hastings stands near the stairs. The door to room 7 stays closed. Footsteps echo on the landing. Victor Sloane appears. He sees them. Stops. "What do you want?" he asks. Poirot says, "To speak with you." "I'm tired," Sloane replies. Poirot points to the door. "Then let us speak inside." Sloane hesitates. Takes a key from his pocket. Opens the door. The room is small. Bed against the wall. Chair near the window. Jacket hanging on a hook. Poirot steps to it. The left sleeve is torn. Jagged tear. Poirot takes out the folded paper. Compares the gray thread to the fabric. Perfect match. He smells the sleeve. "Crushed rose," he says. Sloane frowns. "You have been in a garden with roses," Poirot says. "I passed one yesterday," Sloane replies. "Close enough to tear your coat?" Sloane shrugs. Poirot examines the tear again. "Fresh," he says. Hastings writes in his notebook. Poirot asks, "Where were you last night?" "Here," Sloane says. "All night." "Yes." "Any witnesses?" "No." Poirot walks around the room. Looks at the boots by the bed. Mud on the soles. Dark soil. "From the street?" Poirot asks. "Yes," Sloane says quickly. Poirot looks at him. "Or from a garden under a trellis," he says. Sloane folds his arms. "You can't prove that," he says. Poirot replies, "Not yet." He steps closer. "You worked at Russell Square." Sloane looks away. "For 2 days," he admits. "Foreman says you limp. You have soft hands." "Not a mason's hands," Poirot says. Sloane's jaw tightens. "I needed money." "You needed more than that," Poirot says. Sloane's eyes narrow. Poirot continues, "You knew Gerald Ashcombe. You argued 6 months ago." "That's old news," Sloane says. "It is motive," Poirot replies. Sloane's fists clench. "Are you accusing me?" "I am questioning you," Poirot says. Sloane steps toward him. Poirot doesn't move. "You will answer every question," Poirot says. Sloane breathes heavily. "I have nothing to hide," he says. Poirot glances at Hastings. Hastings closes his notebook. Poirot says, "We will speak again." He walks to the door. Sloane follows. Hastings lingers. His eyes scan Sloane's hands. Something catches. A mark. Just above the left wrist. Thin. Raised. Hastings spots a thin scab on his wrist. Crack. Then bang. Poirot stands by the window. Hastings and Inspector Morrison face him. Evelyn sits in the chair. Poirot begins. The sequence is clear now. Morrison folds his arms. "Explain," he says. Poirot holds up the stone, still sealed in its bag. "This was the first act." He points to the broken mirror. The stone was thrown from the trellis. It shattered the glass. Hastings nods. "The victim heard it." Poirot continues. He turned toward the mirror to see what caused it. Poirot points to the chalk marks on the trellis. At that moment, the killer was here. Morrison says, "With a gun?" "Yes," Poirot replies. "The gun was aimed before the mirror broke." Hastings writes fast. Poirot says, "The victim faced the mirror. The killer's reflection made him turn fully toward the window." "Then the shot," Hastings adds. "Yes." "That was the second act," Poirot says. He raises a finger. Glass. Pause. Gunshot. The gap matches the ear witness account. Morrison says, "Mrs. Sanderson's timing." "Correct," Poirot replies. He sets the bagged stone on the table. Blood on the edge. Glass dust embedded. Weight perfect for the throw. Evelyn leans forward. "So he planned it?" "Every second," Poirot says. He steps to the desk, draws a quick diagram. "Here, mirror angle reflects trellis. Here, victim's chair. Here, trajectory of the bullet." Morrison studies the drawing. "You think Sloane did it?" Poirot says, "He has the torn sleeve." The matching thread. The limp. the knowledge of the property, and the motive. Hastings adds, and no alibi. Exactly, Poirot replies. Morrison steps toward the door. I'll bring him in, he says. Poirot raises a hand. Not yet. Morrison stops. Why not? Poirot says, because the method alone is not proof. We have physical evidence, Morrison says, and a defense lawyer will call it coincidence, Poirot replies. Hastings frowns. What more do we need? Connection, Poirot says, between the stone, the garden, and Sloane. Director, undeniable. Morrison says, we can search his room again. Poirot nods, and question him when he does not expect it, he says. Evelyn watches, silent. Poirot turns to her. You must be patient, madame. I have been patient, she says. Then a little longer, Poirot replies. Morrison moves toward the hall. His hand rests on his cuffs. He looks back. Why wait when we can act? Poirot steps into his path. Inspector reaches for the cuffs. Poirot stops him. Motives braid tight. Poirot faces Sloane in the small room. Hastings stands near the door. Inspector Morrison leans on the wall. Poirot begins. You knew Evelyn Ashcombe before her marriage. Sloane says nothing. Yes or no? Poirot asks. Yes, Sloane says quietly. You admired her, Poirot continues. Sloane looks away. She was kind to me once, he says. Poirot nods. Kindness you wanted to repay. Kindness I never forgot, Sloane replies. And then she married Gerald Ashcombe, Poirot says. Sloane's jaw tightens. Poirot watches him. You disliked him. I knew his type, Sloane says. Explain, Poirot replies. Schemes, quick money, always someone else paying the price. You invested? Poirot asks. Yes, Sloane says. And lost? Everything I had, Sloane answers. Hastings writes the words down. Poirot says, so you lost your money. And the woman you admired married the man who took it. Sloane stays silent. Your pride was damaged, Poirot says. Sloane exhales slowly. Poirot continues, you left town. Yes, Sloane says. You returned when? Poirot asks. 2 weeks ago, Sloane replies. Why? To find work. Poirot shakes his head. To watch Gerald. Sloane looks up sharply. I saw him in the garden, Sloane says. Which night? Poirot asks. The night before he died. Doing what? Talking on the phone, pacing, smiling. Did he see you? No, Sloane says. Poirot steps closer. You were there the next night, too. Sloane's eyes narrow. Prove it, he says. Poirot replies, the torn sleeve, the thread, the rose scent, the mud on your boots. Sloane glances toward the window. Poirot continues, you knew he would be in that room. You knew he would turn toward the mirror if it broke. Sloane's shoulders drop slightly. You threw the stone, Poirot says. Sloane doesn't speak. And when he turned, you fired from the trellis, Poirot adds. Morrison takes a step forward. Sloane's voice is low. He deserved worse, he says. Because he took your money? Poirot asks. Because he laughed at me, Sloane says. When? Poirot asks. The day I asked for it back. He laughed in my face, said I was a fool. Poirot nods slowly. Your pride could not bear it. No, Sloane says. You decided to take his life, Poirot says. Sloane's breathing changes. Hastings glances at Poirot. Poirot holds Sloane's gaze. Sloane's hands tighten into fists. His lips move as if to say more. Sloane's eyes fill. He laughed at me. Wind carries truth. Poirot stands in the bedroom. Sloane stands near the window. Hastings waits by the desk. Inspector Morrison blocks the door. Poirot speaks first. You will show me how you did it. Sloane shakes his head. It's over, Poirot says. You already know, Sloane replies. I want to see it, Poirot says. Sloane hesitates. Poirot points to the window. Open it. Sloane reaches for the latch, pushes the sash up. Poirot says, "Stand where you stood." Sloane steps onto the sill. His left leg drags slightly. "Here," Sloane says. "Then?" Poirot asks. "I held the stone." Sloane mimes gripping it. "I aimed for the mirror," he says. Hastings writes. "I threw it hard," Sloane continues. "It broke." He turned. Poirot nods. "You were already holding the gun." "Yes," Sloane says. "Where?" Poirot asks. "In my right hand," Sloane replies. "Then?" "I fired." Sloane lowers his hand. "He fell back. I climbed down." Poirot asks, "Why climb instead of jump?" "My leg." "Jumping would slow me more," Sloane says. Poirot steps closer. "You planned it for days." "Yes," Sloane says. "You knew he would stand there." "Yes." "You knew the mirror would reflect you." "Yes." "You knew Evelyn would be suspected." Sloane pauses. "I didn't care," he says. Poirot says, "You cared only for yourself." Sloane looks away. "I cared about what he took from me," Sloane says. Morrison steps forward. "You admit you killed Gerald Ashcombe?" "Yes," Sloane says. Hastings stops writing. Poirot says, "And you struck first with the stone?" "Yes," Sloane says. "To distract him, to make him look, to make the shot easy." Poirot glances at Morrison. "That is your confession," Poirot says. "It is," Sloane replies. Evelyn steps into the doorway. Her face is set. She says nothing. Sloane looks at her. "I didn't do it for you," he says. She doesn't answer. Morrison takes out the handcuffs. Sloane doesn't resist. He turns away from Evelyn. Poirot steps aside. Hastings closes his notebook. Morrison fits the cuffs over Sloane's wrists. The metal snaps shut. Sloane exhales. Evelyn's eyes shift to the floor. Handcuffs click. Evelyn looks away. Paper fights facts. Poirot sits at the coroner's table. The file is open. Coroner Penrose reads aloud. "Cause of death, gunshot wound to the chest. Manner of death, suicide." Poirot says, "That is wrong." Penrose raises an eyebrow. Poirot places 3 envelopes on the table. "Fibers from the trellis," he says. He opens the first. A gray thread falls onto the paper. "Matches the torn sleeve of Victor Sloane," Poirot says. He opens the second envelope. A small paper packet slides out. He tips it over. Fine, gray powder scatters. "Cement dust from the trellis sill. Matches the work site where Sloane was seen," Poirot says. He opens the third envelope. The bagged stone lands on the table. Blood on the edge. Glass dust embedded. Thrown from the trellis to break the mirror, Poirot says. Penrose studies each item. "And the timing?" he asks. Poirot points to Hastings. Hastings opens his notebook. "Mrs. Sanderson heard glass first. Half a minute later, the gunshot," Hastings says. Poirot adds, "The delay proves 2 actions. First the throw, then the shot." Penrose flips through his notes. "You have a confession." "Yes," Poirot says, "from Sloane himself." Morrison steps forward. "He admitted it in the victim's room," Morrison says. Penrose looks at Morrison. "You witnessed this?" "Yes," Morrison says. Penrose closes the file. He reaches for a new form. "Then the record must be amended," he says. He strikes through the word suicide, writes homicide in its place, signs his name at the bottom. Poirot nods once. "That is justice," he says. Lorton steps into the room. He holds the insurance policy. "Has the verdict changed?" he asks. "Yes," Penrose says. "Homicide," Poirot answers. Lorton opens his briefcase, takes out a release form, places it on the table. "This authorizes payment," Lorton says. Evelyn enters behind him. She stands still. Her eyes move between Lorton and Poirot. Lorton taps the form. "I will send this to the company immediately," he says. Poirot studies Lorton's face. Do it without delay, Poirot says. Lorton picks up his pen, pauses for a moment. Evelyn's hands tighten at her sides. Morrison watches Lorton closely. Hastings glances at Poirot. The room is quiet. Lorton lowers the pen to the paper. Release the funds, Lorton says, or does he? Some mirrors stay cracked. The case file is shut. The house is quiet. Evelyn sits at the table. Lorton places papers before her. Sign here, he says. She takes the pen. Signs without pause. Lorton gathers the papers. They will transfer the amount within days, he says. Evelyn nods. Her hands rest on the table. The ink dries. Her tears have stopped. Poirot stands near the doorway, Hastings beside him. Morrison has already left. Evelyn looks at Poirot. You believed me from the start, she says. Yes, Poirot replies. Why? You had no reason to lie. But more important, the facts spoke, Poirot says. Hastings closes his notebook. All the details fit, he says. Evelyn asks, will he be punished? Poirot says, the law will see to that. She looks down at the table. Poirot steps forward. You have your house, he says. Yes, she replies. But at a cost, Poirot adds. Evelyn nods once. Poirot glances toward the stairs. He walks into the bedroom. Hastings follows. The broken mirror remains on the wall. Glass shards in the tray below. Poirot studies the frame. Pride and money, Poirot says quietly. Enough to drive a man to plan every move, Hastings replies. And small facts, Poirot says. They cut through lies, Hastings adds. Poirot points to the sill. Gray dust, a thread, blood on a stone. They were enough. Hastings says, enough to save her. Yes, Poirot says. He looks at the trellis outside the open window. Small facts give the truth shape, he says. Hastings closes the window. Poirot turns away from the mirror. They walk back down the stairs. Evelyn stands as they enter. Will you take tea before you go? She asks. Poirot shakes his head. There's nothing more to say, he says. She walks them to the door. Lorton waits outside. He gives Poirot a brief nod. The funds will be secure, Lorton says. Poirot returns the nod. Hastings steps out first. Poirot follows. Evelyn remains at the doorway. She watches until they reach the gate. Poirot stops. He looks back at her. Keep the mirror as it is, he says. She frowns. Why? To remember what was broken and what was saved, Poirot says. She doesn't answer. Poirot turns and walks on. Hastings keeps pace beside him. Neither speaks. No cliff. Just a breath. Order restored.